alaikum and indeed a warm welcome to Telegram Express. I'm your host Ayesha Laatoe with a clock at 11:26, and I see Umar is still pressing all the right buttons. We have Lauren Davis, experienced clinical psychologist and guest speaker at events online with us, speaking about surviving workplace bullying. Lauren, good morning to you and thanks so much for being online with us.
Hi, thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Lauren, when we speak about surviving bullying in the workplace, do you host workshops with regards to this as well?
Yes, I do. In fact, I've got one on the 30th of May in Cape Town. It's a half-day workshop where I spend quite a bit of time helping people work out what is bullying and what isn't bullying, and then just talking through various ways of how to survive it, what you can do, what support is available, and how to deal with bullying in the workplace.
Is bullying in the workplace something very common?
Yes, it is. In fact, there was a research report that came out about 2 years ago that said 96% of people in the workplace have experienced some form of bullying. And I think it's when you expand the definition of bullying that you get to realize how it can be such a high percentage. So, generally when we think about bullying, we just think about like the bully on the playground who's beating people up. But actually, what we see in the workplace is not the physical bullying, but more the emotional bullying. So it's things like constant criticism, shouting at, verbal abuse, excluding people, using their work as your work as their own work. It's a whole cluster of behaviours that are really aimed at diminishing somebody else's confidence and self-esteem, and putting the bully at a higher, giving them more power. Basically, that's how we view bullying in the workplace.
We often find that you mentioned bullying and, criticizing or, looking at one's work and not having something positive to say. So often one would think that, okay, it's constructive criticism. But would you say if it's an ongoing thing, then it becomes worrying as well?
Yeah, and I think it's a very fine line. So often when I run these workshops in-house, managers and human resource professionals in the business are often quite anxious about running this kind of a workshop because they're going to say, yeah, but we have to give our people performance feedback. Yes. And now they're going to see that as bullying. And so when it's constructive and it's aimed at actually building the person's competence, then it's not bullying, but it's bullying when it's like nitpicking on every little thing that the person does, and it's constant criticism without any appreciation. And so often I say to managers, if you're finding that you're having to constantly criticize somebody's performance, well, then probably they shouldn't be there. If you've got nothing to appreciate them for, if they're not doing anything right, then maybe they're not in the right role. And so the bullying, it takes on more of a malicious tone, where it's almost like an intent to demean or belittle or undermine the other person's self-esteem. That's how we know the difference between just constructive feedback, which is actually, when I run workshops on performance management or how to give the tough feedback, the intent of that is actually to try and build the person up. It's like, I care enough about you to give you this constructive feedback so that you can be a better person. Whereas bullying it's like a malicious intent of like, it's almost like beating you up, but not physically. It's with my words and with my feedback, yes. And so that I can then feel better about myself and you feel worse about yourself, which is very different to the intent behind giving people constructive feedback.
Lauren, I have a question here, and this the listener's asking, it's so familiar. Does it happen to both males and females when it comes to bullying in the workplace?
Yeah, it's a very common question, I guess, and I think both females and males can be bullies, and both females and males can be bullied. I think what we're seeing at the moment in the workplace is that it's more often the male that's the bully, only because we have a lot more men in leadership positions than women often. We still haven't necessarily transformed leadership structures that they're truly gender neutral. And so it's often people in a management position that tend to do more of the bullying, and at present, we still have more men in those positions, but it's not unique.
I love when you say somebody in a management position, but we all know that, you have those top-down structures in any company. So who's being bullied and why are we bullying? So are we getting to the gist or the essence of what is really happening? Are we going to just, look for solutions, or are we going to remedy it?
Yeah. And so my big drive in the solution part is around what you're referring to, is like getting to the root cause. And I truly believe that it's our current corporate or workplace culture that almost enables bullying or allows it, because we have this hierarchical structure. Some people are still stuck to the old school authoritarian leadership styles or management styles, where it's like, I'm the boss, you do what I say, you have no voice, you're lucky you've got a job, I'm paying you, so do as I say. And that kind of mentality almost makes bullying tolerable. So for me, in terms of the broader, from a systemic level, the solution is around really re-looking at leadership, and how can leadership be about creating environments where people can think for themselves, can do their jobs well, and that a leader's job is actually about bringing out the potential in everybody that works with them. And it's really, in a lot of the leadership work I do, I talk about you have to be able to lead people's heads, hearts, and hands, not just their hands. And so that's my kind of systemic solution, is looking at the corporate culture and what values do we subscribe to, and how do we treat people. Because my big belief is, you don't build a business, you build your people, and your people build your business.
Indeed.
So it's about investing in the people.
So there's no excuse by saying, we have tough competition, or we're in a competitive world when it comes to being the corporate world, and so we need to, be productive, and if we're not productive, we're not going to be successful, but rather looking at the successes by first should we say, investing, like you say, in your staff first then.
Totally. And there's research that's come out recently by a guy called Daniel Kim, and he looked at what makes the successful company successful. And the really successful companies say, yes, it's obviously the quality of our results, so the productivity and getting what we want to get. It's also what we do. But he said the really successful companies are the ones that spend time on building the quality of their relationships. Because it's when we have strong relationships, people come to work more engaged, more fulfilled, and then the productivity almost happens as a byproduct. But if we just focus on the results, people become disconnected and disengaged. And I think one of the biggest things we're experiencing in the corporate space is what is not necessarily absenteeism, but we call it presenteeism, where people are, their bodies at work, but they're not there, they're not engaged, they're not giving it their best, and that directly impacts productivity. So my thing is, in a highly competitive world, at the moment, your biggest investment is in your people.
Okay.
And making sure that they're equipped to do their work.
And Lauren, there's a comment that says, I feel most of the time it's the actions, and sometimes subtle and manipulative.
Yes. Yeah, so it can be very subtle. It is often very subtle, should I say, that it's very hard to pinpoint it and say this is bullying. In fact, in South Africa, our labor law only talks about harassment. So I can only lay a grievance for either physical or sexual harassment. There's nothing in our labor law that actually has a policy around what constitutes bullying and what you can do about bullying. And so it's very subtle to say I'm being bullied. And often if it's a manager bullying a subordinate, it's much harder because the manager is the one that holds the power. And I think the manipulative word is accurate as well. It's often done for self-gain. So it's very manipulative around, I'm going to do whatever it takes to make myself look good at the cost of somebody else. And so the intent is quite win-lose. Yeah, so I would agree with those two descriptions.
Okay. This one says, I'm not too sure what they're referring to. It says, hi, while we as management are told by general management positions we must open the floor to floor staff daily, KPI, and we must email to the whole company who's doing what for the day. Myself as management think it's part of bullying to the floor staff. So
it's hard to answer those kind of without knowing the specifics, and I guess for me it's always about, it's what's the intent behind it. So if it's around holding people accountable and wanting transparency in what people's KPIs are, and it's done in a constructive way, then it's not bullying. I think if it's about trying to catch people out and criticize them and blame, then it could be bullying. So for me, what constitutes bullying is always what is the intent behind it. If the intent is to build people up and build competence and help people be better than they are, then I wouldn't say that's bullying. But if it's around making somebody, if it's about overly controlling, micromanaging, and making people doubt their own capabilities, then it could possibly be bullying.
Okay. This one says, every day I see my colleagues at work being bullied because she's younger. Please give some advice.
Yeah, there's so many permutations for me to just give advice. I guess, being bullied because of age is not acceptable. And it's about, for me, people need to be treated based on their ability and their competence. And there is, for the first time in the industrial working era, we've got 4 different generations working under the same roof, where we've still got people in their 70s and 80s that are still around, and the early 20s that are joining, and this generational gap can create quite a lot of tension within relationships, and often the older people struggle to understand how the new generation is working, and they can be quite bullish or bullyish, I guess, in their approach. I suppose I don't have a direct answer. My thing is always just around, if you have a human resources department, the best thing is to always just speak to somebody about it who's objective, to try and see, is it bullying or isn't it? And then sometimes it has to lead to a formal grievance. Sometimes it's something that you can do in conversation. I do know that people are often very cautious to go and speak to HR or to talk about it because of fear of further victimization. And so for me, it's around creating awareness around what bullying is in the workplace, so that people feel free to speak out.
If you're afraid to speak out, isn't it important then, to make sure that there's a paper trail always with what it is, with your grievances, or the fact that, there's a paper trail to say that, look, I have approached you at this and that time, and this was what bothered me, but nothing was done. So, what happens then thereafter if for the 3rd time nothing has been done?
Yeah, exactly. So the paper trail is critical. So when I consult with people individually, or if I run the workshops, I always say every single communication you have with the person that you suspect is bullying you, you need to write it down. Even if it was just the 2 of you in a room and there's nobody else as a third party to verify it, it's about recording, it was this time, this is where we were, this is what the conversation was about, and this is what was said. And if at all possible, always try and have things in email, because there you've got your paper trail. And I think the approach is often, the right approach is to speak to human resources. Because often what happens is human resources, they don't necessarily always see the bullying, because the boss or the bully would not portray that behavior to them. So they're very kind of manipulative and clever in being able to hide the bullying behavior from those who know that they could get caught by. And I guess the last resort, and it's not one that I say we take lightly, but sometimes it comes to a choice of, I've had conversations, I've tried to speak out, nothing's happening, and the person who's bullying me is, the one who's got the ultimate power. And sometimes the choice has to be to leave the organization. And I'm not saying that that's the easy answer, but sometimes it's just intolerable to stay there. And if there is an opportunity to get out, it's sometimes the last resort. If nothing is happening, then for me it's about protecting yourself, and not putting yourself. It can become like a situation of domestic violence. It can become that abusive that. As much as some people say to me, I don't want to leave. Why? Because then he or she's winning, and then it's a principal thing, and how do they get away with it? And I understand all of that, but at some point it's about self-protection. And it would be the same thing I would say if I was counseling a woman who was being abused. At some point you've got to make the decision to protect yourself and leave. And that's if it becomes incredibly intolerable.
Okay. We go for it, Lauren. If you have time, we can still continue after the ad break. So please do stay online. Our listeners, stay tuned. And I'd love the fact that your questions are coming through as well.
The Voice of the Cape. 10 AM Express.
Assalamu alaikum and indeed a warm welcome. We're focusing on surviving the workplace bullying with Lauren Davis, experienced clinical psychologist, as well as a guest speaker at various events, speaking about the workshop that will be taking place soon as well, but also getting your questions coming. I see. Lauren, a warm welcome once again to you.
Thank you.
There's a question here that says, what when HR and the bullying manager are in cahoots and at least 10 people have already lost their jobs? Does it make a difference if it's a private company?
No, I think so. The labour law is the labour law, and I think our rights are protected by the labour law. So private company or not, it doesn't make a difference. I guess the challenge is if it's a owner-run company, then often owners can make their own policies or decisions around how they want to lead their people and their culture. And I think, not to speak badly of the HR profession, because that's where I come from. I think often HR professionals are in a very challenging position because the bullies are often their own bosses and all the exco that they report to. And sometimes the wool is pulled over their eyes. So my kind of recommendation always to people who are in HR is if you are hearing complaints about bullying, it's always to take it seriously, not always to necessarily follow the grievance procedure immediately, but always where there's smoke, there's fire, and always do investigations, always get other people's opinions, and watch for the patterns in the behaviors. And I suppose, there are always the external routes, which are not always pleasant, but there are external labour lawyers that you can go to get advice in terms of what to do if your HR professional internally is not supporting you in this.
Okay. Lauren, there's one that says it's actually dogmatic and sickening, very sad, and there's no conscience, and one wonders why. It's really hard to understand and accept. It's very sad, and that is happening to me, this listener is saying, as well as it's not, the bottom line is it's not right, and I now ask, who is the next victim? It leaves room for the cycle to continue, and it is very sick.
Yeah, I hear that, and I think that's often, it's what sometimes keeps people from leaving, is because if I leave, then the next person will be targeted. And it's a very complex situation, because sometimes one has to leave to protect oneself, even though the behavior is going to continue. And it's around, what I always say is you can't die in the fight. So you can try and fight and protect the system and protect others, but sometimes in this situation it becomes like a survival thing. I think though also what this listener is referring to is something a little bit more severe than just normal bullying. Not that bullying is normal, but what I talk about is like the spectrum of bullying. And I think, on the milder side is just somebody who's just rough around the edges. So they just don't know how to treat people, and they maybe come with a whole lot of ideas of what, having a tough conversation is about, or how to get performance out of people.
Yes.
And those kind of people often, with some feedback and with some maybe coaching or leadership training, they can shift and stop that, what we would see as bullying behavior.
Okay.
Then in the middle of the continuum, I've got people that bully, or I said people that bully because they're traumatized. So they were either bullied or hurt in some way, and now they're trying to enact that on others. Mm-hmm. But I think what this listener is referring to is on the very severe end of the spectrum is what we see or call sociopathic or psychopathic behavior, which does show up in the workplace as well. And that's more dangerous.
Must be, because the listener is actually saying that, honestly, I wish anyone going through something like this, my absolute best, and children commit suicide in these situations. So, one looks at the severity of what she is currently experiencing, so also making mention of suicide. So, if not her or him, but mentioning this is what children are also experiencing, unfortunately. And it says here that they think that they are control freaks and like fame and fortune, unfortunately. So this is a very angry listener that's actually commenting here as well. And I think, we need to actually get your details to them, and also when your next workshop would be, so that they can empower themselves. And people would want to know, does it make a difference, and where do one go to for help?
Totally. And I think often what I find when people come to the workshops is there's a sense of relief of like, oh, so this is happening. Yes. Because I think part of the process is like you start to feel crazy, like you're the one that's going mad. So there's like a validation of, oh, so there are people out there that do bully and do behave like this, and it's not me. I'm not the one going crazy. So just in that is a sense of relief. So either in the workshop or, if they want to chat to me individually, just some sense of normalizing what they're going through in a way to say that it does exist and you are being bullied. And then, the suicide is a very serious and sad reality where some people just feel trapped and there's no other way out.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously my thing would be to want to help get that person help as soon as possible so that they don't feel like that's their only option.
This is the final comment we're taking now. This one says, my boss told me to leave. If I don't, I will only be paid 1 month's salary, and they let HR deal with me, or take 3 months salary and bonus. And then they went on to hire another person a month later, and no leave pay, it says here. And they an international company. I was literally forced out of my work.
And so that's difficult to know whether that's bullying necessarily or just unfair labor practice. And so that listener would do well to contact the CCMA just to find out what her rights are, because that might, it's not necessarily unfair labor practice cannot always be called bullying, but it's just people that are not following due process according to the labor law. And that's where the CCMA plays a fantastic role, just even an advisory role to see whether you have a case or not. And my experience with the CCMA has been that they're incredibly helpful to take your call, to listen to your story and see if they can advise and support you.
Indeed. Just this comment coming from the listeners saying she's not, or he's not, they're not angry. It's the reality for quite a couple of people. So just on that note, Lauren, your next workshop, when will that be hosted and where?
So it's on the 30th of May here in Cape Town. I think if the listeners are interested in attending, they could just contact me and I can send them the details of that workshop. Okay. And then also if they can't make the workshop, or for some people it's, they would prefer not to have to go, talk about this in a group, I'm also available for individual consultations.
Lauren, you're going to share your email address with our listeners or your telephone link?
I'll send my email, give my email address, which is Lauren, Lauren,
yes,
at Lauren Davis, davis.co.za.
Lauren, thanks so much for being online with us this morning, and I see that indeed there's a great need for speaking about bullying in the workplace as well and how to survive it. But thanks so much for your time this morning.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And thank you to your listeners.
Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Thanks, you too. Bye.